If you start Satanism with any degree of seriousness, you are literally lining yourself up for possession. When you're talking about gender-affirming care, having surveys done after 1 or 2 years is meaningless.
And the question, why does God allow innocent people, even children, to suffer so much?
When you're talking about especially gender-affirming care, having surveys done after 1 or 2 years is meaningless. And if you look on the internet right now and you try and get some data, on what's going on with transgenders, you look at all these short-term surveys and they're asking these opinion polls when still the placebo effect of having a surgery is in place, right? Mm-hmm. So now this person is receiving gender-affirming care, and of course for the first year or two, they can really feel that their anxieties are reduced because of a placebo effect, right? So in other words, I got what I needed. My anxiety levels will, be decreased. The same thing, you get the fake shot and you really believe, I am getting better, and so forth. So that happens, but then you can see gradually what becomes, an ever declining emotional state. So by the time you get to 5 years out, you can really see now the anxiety and depression levels that are growing. Notice that in all these so-called longitudinal surveys that you see on the internet, you never get to 5 years out. But if you get to the Swedish or the Netherlands or the CAS, Surgeon General report, United Kingdom study, you can see that they're tracing 5 years out and 10 years out. And then you see the anxiety level going up, up, up. Then by 10 years, that's when you have a suicide rate that increases 20 times above the general population, 2,000% increase in not just in suicidality, but in actual suicides themselves. We can see the same thing happening just with receiving gender-affirming care, which is to receive hormones of the opposite gender of your biological sex. And when you start in, again, there's a great placebo effect. Everything seems good, no problems. But then as you move further and further away from the time of the study, you see the anxiety level creep up. And why? Because the anxieties have not been treated. There are anxieties that are proper to autism. Autism is present in many, like 50% of the cases. People are on the spectrum that want transgender, some kind of therapy of one kind or another, and are seeking a sex change or at least hormone.
And the question, why does God allow innocent people, even children, to suffer so much?
Yeah, well, here's my thought. Obviously, I think the philosopher's answer to the question, which when you're the suffering agent, it's hard to understand, is that God made us free. And if God made us free, then essentially he has to allow us to do something evil. Otherwise, our love would not be our own. In other words, if you don't have the option, the freedom to do something unloving, to do something that will cause suffering to somebody else, then you really don't have the freedom to love somebody through your own self-willed power. In other words, you don't have the option. You've been programmed only to do loving behaviors. And of course, God didn't want a robot that was programmed to do loving behaviors. Right. He wanted one made in his own image and likeness. He wanted us to be free, and therefore he has to allow us the choice or the possibility of doing harm in order so that our love could be freely initiated from within us. So that's the problem. If you're not going to create a robot to do loving behaviors, you're going to have to create somebody who's going to do that. Now you say, well, why wouldn't God, like in the case of these innocent children, why wouldn't God give that guy a lobotomy on the way? Well, you can't go and give everybody a lobotomy who's going to do a Hitler-esque thing or do a killing of a child thing. You've got to have some consistency and standard in order for us to be free. In other words, if we're kind of ducking every time we think, well, maybe I'll do this sinful thing, maybe I'll do this dishonest or harmful thing, and you're ready for the lobotomy to come out of the air, and you go, maybe I won't do that. You're not free, right? So you got the sort of Damocles hanging over your head.
Mm-hmm.
So God can't go around, lobotomizing people at will to prevent, evil to even little children,
Right.
or innocent victims in concentration camps, and all the other terrible destitution that's been done, because of human freedom. And so, the price of human freedom is we're going to do harms and evils and, not just great ones, but little ones to one another. And God's going to allow it because he has to allow us to be free.
Here's another question. Dear Father Spitzer, there has been an obvious uptick in Satanism. Many don't take it seriously. To some, it's something to live by, no better or worse than anything else. How much can I explain the danger of such a belief? This is also from someone named Frank.
Frank, I'd go back to, if you have the stomach to read this book, there's a book called Demonic Foes by Dr. Richard Gallagher, a good Columbia psychiatrist in New York City. Probably oversaw, I'm sure, more than 20 exorcisms himself. It has to be a prejudgment before an exorcism is done, and he was a consulting psychiatrist for this. I mean, his credentials are obviously from the best schools in the nation. Essentially, he oversaw these things. One of the cases that he looks at is a case of a high priestess. She was a Satanist and a high priestess in that sect called Julia. And I want you to go ahead and read that thing. Julia looks like a perfectly normal person sometimes, but in many respects, Julia is just, every time she tries to get this exorcism, she wants to get freed of, these dark forces that are have taken her over. And she knows that she is destined for this place of darkness, of wickedness, of domination, of cruelty. She knows, that perpetrated by, her fellow Satanists down there in the domain of the Dark One. And she knows, that this is going to happen. She doesn't want it. Yet at the same time, she is, as much as she's trying to, go through this exorcism, the other part of her, the demon that has possessed her, and it is a very powerful demon, right? I mean, she will call up, like, as I said, the exorcist was talking, it was either with Dr. Gallagher or another fellow exorcist on the phone. The two of them were, and I think Dr. Gallagher was on that phone, but anyway, she comes right on with a demonic voice and is interrupting their phone call. She's nowhere near, the phones, or, she just knows that it's going on. Obviously, it's not Julia who knows, it's the demonic spirit who knows. And of course, is trying to interfere with, this dialogue that they're having about the exorcism. She has remarkable powers and so forth, but eventually, she quits. She doesn't go back to finish the exorcism. Basically, she's just dragged back in because, of course, this spirit, is, to do an exorcism, you have to be perfectly free to attend. And, she basically couldn't bring herself to do it. And so she did die. She was dying of some disease, maybe cancer or something. But anyway, if you have a chance to read that book, Demonic Foes, this is a possessed individual who's a Satanist. And I'll just simply say this. If you start, on Satanism with any degree of seriousness, it's no game. You are literally lining yourself up, at the very least, for oppression. And at the very most, of course, for possession by that demonic spirit, and multiple demonic spirits that may be as well. And so if you do that, your life is going to radically change. And, the movement toward cruelty, the movement toward domination, the movement toward truly, anti-love is going to be, palpable, to say the least. And as you move toward those things, you think you can break free after you have become part of some kind of sadistic sacrifice and so forth in a Satanist cult, you think you're going to just stop it? I can assure you there are going to be forces that are going to be preventing you from doing that. You're going to literally have to strap yourself practically down to get an exorcism or demand that this be completed with your full assent. And you know, sacramental confession is generally as essential for exorcisms to be completed successfully. Well, not essential, but most of the time it really is needed to do that. And of course, the reception of the Eucharist helps immensely, as we've seen in many exorcism cases. But the main thing is just read that book by Dr. Gallagher, Richard Gallagher, called Demonic Foes. I think it's Harper 1. Take a look at it, and you can see you're just lining yourself up for a possession or an oppression. That's not only going to be a different life, it's going to be dark, cruel, dominating, and in the end, it's going to be a long eternity with your good mates down there who are equally filled with the darkness, domination, and cruelty.
Dear Father Spitzer, I was wondering about the idea of the ensoulment of Adam and Eve. If Adam and Eve's kids had souls from God and they married a person without a soul from God, what would this mean for their children? Anonymous. Well,
I don't think they would marry a person that didn't have a soul. They would be a completely different hominid. You're comparing somebody, you know, I shouldn't probably say this, but yeah, probably a 25 IQ in a lower level hominid. Maybe a 50 IQ, but somebody who has 100 to 125 IQ is just, you're just not going to marry somebody with a 50 IQ. I'll just say that as, you know, as bluntly as I can. It's you know, the odds of that happening are ultra rare, especially if God has provided more than enough people, and I think he would have done that, who are ensouled and could have, you know, abstract intelligence, self-consciousness, and so forth. And the Neanderthologist simply does not have that. You know, as I've always said, God did provide animals with a huge range of empathy. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. I mean, chimpanzees are very dolphins are very empathetic. Dogs are very whales are very empathetic. You know, and so, you know, hominids like a Neanderthal could be very empathetic, and, you know, could, you know, display you know, real affection and return of affection and things of that nature, but they're just the intelligence, the self-consciousness, the abstract intellection, the transcendental desires, religion. What are you going to discuss with a pre-human hominid? But the main point to say is, it's not going to happen, but God's going to have to ensoul every single individual after Adam and Eve, whether they're Adam and Eve's progeny or not, right? They have to be mitochondrial Eve's and Y chromosome Adam's progeny, yes, but they don't necessarily have to be Adam and Eve's progeny. You know, you can't be, you know, going through and trying to deduce science from metaphorical explanations for human sinfulness, et cetera, that are being given in the Genesis narratives. It's you know, it just won't work. Genesis is a metaphorical, not a scientific or an historical narrative. And so it's trying to answer the questions about God, the essential sacred truths necessary for salvation, about God, who human beings are, etc. All these things are, you know, legitimately find a place for Scripture, but it's not a scientific document, and it's not a historical document. It was never meant to be, and anybody who tries to make it so is going to run into these errors again and again and again. And frankly, please don't prosecute the Scopes trial on me, because I don't hold to that. And so, you know, we don't, as Catholics, have to believe in a literal interpretation of Scripture. We can believe in a metaphorical one, and we've got a good set of rules for translating the sacred truths in Genesis and the scientific truths that we are given by our good contemporary scientific analysis.
Dear Father Spitzer, right after the horrific shooting at the Annunciation Church in Minneapolis, the mayor of the city and several other politicians criticized people for praying, saying that it was a worthless act. Statements were made that they were killed praying. What good did it do them? What were your thoughts on the matter?
I mean, prayer is obviously not worthless. Prayer has helped millions and millions and millions of people. There are obviously good studies that have been done by Dr. Harold Koenig at Duke University Medical School, where you can see very clearly that people who have observant, are observant in their religion and actually practice their religion, these people get healthier faster. The long-term results of what they're doing last much longer, et cetera. You can see all these correlations, not just in the endocrine system, the cardiac system, all the way along the line. You can see physical health improves tremendously with people who pray, people who have religious observance. Same thing with emotional health. And so forth. Again, when there's prayers that abound, really good things happen, especially if the person involved is receptive of the prayer. They don't have to receiving the specific prayer. Maybe they're unconscious, but if they're a religious person who does believe that God, is kind of working with them, helping them into His eternal kingdom, they're receptive of that grace. Prayer actually does work, and like I said, it's not just the Koenig studies. There's a Benelli study. There's a bunch of other studies that are very good that show this correlation. And so, just if people want some, good empirical evidence that prayer works, it certainly does. Right. And by the way, if you think you have the answer as a non-religious person about the efficacy of prayer, go ahead. You can give me surgery lessons too without a single day of medical school. But that's basically what you're trying to do. So I'd say, maybe not commenting on the worthlessness of prayer is your best starting point if you want to get a good political dialogue going. Right. Otherwise, go ahead and do your usual divisive political lines in order to take the onus of what's obviously a terrible tragedy that has taken place in your community, trying to lever God as somehow being worthless, or indeed, making more divisions. Look to yourself first and look at home before you start, pointing the finger.
Dear Father Spitzer, altars in a church have an altar stone which contains relics of one or more saints. What about masses prayed outside of a church, such as a home, in a school gymnasium, or even a battlefield during the war? Is it obligatory to have relics for a valid or illicit mass? This is from Chino.
Chino, you already guessed it and answered your own question. It is not obligatory. Otherwise, of course, those masses would be invalid. And of course, they're not invalid. They are both valid and illicit. But, if we try to correspond to the Roman Missal as much as we can, but in particular situations where, that's just certainly not a possibility, obviously, we can dispense with that. Of course, in a state of war or something like that, it's pretty clear. And of course, yes, there are many places like a home mass or other kinds of things where you do not have a relic present.
Scientific discovery versus biblical revelation. There is one God, not many, that everything else in reality besides the one God is a creation of God, that God is just and makes things good.
That's the message, and human beings are not just cannon fodder for the gods to play with. God has made us in His own image and likeness, and so we have a transcendental intrinsic worth which has to be respected, and even that God respects, because He is the one that created us in our freedom. And so, which is a very different view of God than what you see in this rival myths of the Semitic cultures surrounding Israel. So these things were really necessary. This turn in the history of religions is really necessary. Israel has this huge prophetic place to play in giving us a whole new perspective on the sacred truths necessary for salvation. That Genesis narrative changed the world. But of course, nobody meant it to be a replacement for science. They meant it to be an explanation of the sacred truths needed for salvation.